So for our first opposition view of the season on the We Are West Ham podcast, it was the same first opposition view of last season. Funnily enough, we were all really confident ahead of the Newcastle United game at home at the London Stadium. We all remember how that turned out. But I'm delighted to say joining us for the first time is Chris Waugh, Newcastle United reporter from The Athletic. Tip of the hat to our good friend Rashane Thomas for putting us in touch. Chris, delighted to have you with us. We didn't have you on last season. West Ham fans, perhaps foolishly, I think are pretty confident going into the first game of the season against Newcastle on Sunday. We had that feeling both fixtures last season and got turned over twice. I'm not sure, you can tell me. Were West Ham the only team Newcastle did the double over?
No, Everton as well.
Everton. Oh, that's not bad. Yeah, that's not bad. But look, it's brilliant for you to join us, Chris. What's the feeling among Newcastle fans at the moment? We have a saying on this podcast that we're the London version of Newcastle. A lot of animosity towards our owners from our certain sections of our fans. It's obviously the same for Newcastle, and I've seen a few tweets already after the Joe Willock news saying that West Ham are now the only team in the Premier League yet to sign a permanent outfield player. There's always those comparisons going on, but what's the feeling up there at the moment going into the new season?
Well, the time is 5:46 on a Tuesday, and as of yet, Newcastle haven't actually signed Joe Willock. He is on his way, but they haven't actually signed him yet. There are still a few issues to iron out. So just in case we're sort of speaking out to him, but the feeling on Newcastle, the Willock news has given everyone a little bit of a boost, but it's from a very low base. It's been a wearing. I was going to say it's been a wearing. Some of us, a wearing 14 years now, Mike Ashley, but particularly the last 18 months have been very, very tiring. It's felt like the club has been in limbo and nothing has moved on. I'm not going to bore everyone with the specifics of the takeover saga, which continues to drag on with Newcastle United, but has left them in this state where they've got an owner who, by his own admission, wants to go and has tried to basically get rid of the club, offload the club from his own, and really he's putting little to no investment into the club. He has done it over the last 10 years anyway, but he's lost interest. It's a club that just seems to be going from month to month almost, trying to just get through. And Willock gives everyone a little bit of a lift because it means that he did really well at Newcastle, and in some ways it seems like a bit of at least a relative statement signing. But even if the Willock deal is completed, Newcastle will go into the West Ham game with really the same squad as they finished last season, albeit without Andy Carroll, who's been released, obviously former West Ham player. So really that they haven't actually moved forward since the end of last season, and that is a bit of a concern. And everyone really, I think, is very disillusioned with the club and how they can become really get enthused about a new season when really the owner doesn't want to be there. The manager is sort of almost just there out of default to a certain extent, and it just feels like they're just chugging along on a road to nowhere in particular.
Just existing at the moment. You mentioned there about the start in the season with perhaps the exact same. West Ham are in a very similar boat, I think, at the moment. There'll be those listening to this, no doubt, who will argue that if anything, West Ham are in a worse position because we haven't got Jesse Lingard still in the ranks as we did at the end of the last campaign. As you're saying, this Milenkovic looks like it's going to be coming over the line soon. It's been a fairly quiet transfer window across most teams, outside the behemoths, the Man Cities, the PSGs and all that sort of thing. It's been relatively quiet. I know Manchester United have done a bit of business, but for clubs like West Ham, Newcastle and those sort of ilk, it's been a fairly quiet transfer window. Is there any sort of understanding among the faithful up at St James's Park at the moment of the club's predicament, or is there just, as we've seen at West Ham in the past, just clouded by anger?
I think it's a mixture. I think some fans are really angry. I think others recognise, it has been a slow market. It has been across Europe, and also I think it beyond even just the financial effects of pandemic football and behind closed doors football. I think the fact that the Euros were so late and the players have come back to the sort of bigger squads late, they haven't been willing to release some of their players, which has sort of meant that, because Newcastle in particular, if they're signing one beyond Willock, they're likely to be loan signings, probably from the so-called top six. And so they're waiting for players to be released from those squads, which would be likely to be later on. So there is some understanding, but I think that it's more just general frustration of that even before the excuses that you could give Mike Ashley now in terms of financial effects of the pandemic and the takeover situation. This is sort of how they acted for a large period anyway, and people are just fed up and they just want something to look forward to, something different, just the feeling that their club could be better, and yet everyone really thinks that Newcastle are going to be, it's going to be probably somewhere between 12th and 14th, which is where they've finished each of the last few years since they've been back into the Premier League. And that's the frustration. It's not even seeing a pathway forward. I mean, they have actually some exciting and some good players. If they get everyone on the pitch fit at once, if you have Saint-Maximin, Wilson, Willock, if he does arrive, Almiron, there's some really good, exciting attacking players there. But it just doesn't feel like there's a really enough to push for top 10 or anything like that. And it's just going to be the same old story.
Chris.
There you go.
Forgive me for if I'm going over old ground there. I lost sound and microphone access there for about
other than that, it was a pretty good spell for you, mate.
Yeah, other than that, yeah. I was just wondering what the situation is and the feeling is around Steve Bruce at Newcastle. Obviously, the style of football has come under a bit of scrutiny amongst Newcastle fans and neutrals as well. He's a Newcastle fan, by all accounts, not going to walk away from the job regardless of how difficult the conditions are under Mike Ashley. Is the feeling that, he's probably not the right man, but it's the feeling is, okay, we're happy just to stick with him while we go through this off-field saga that's going on? Or do you feel like, or the Newcastle fans feel like a change is probably needed sooner rather than later, just to give that club a little bit of an extra boost, like the Willock signing that's coming, just to get you through another season until the takeover or something else happens that, starts taking Newcastle into the right direction?
I think from some fans, you're right, there has almost been that sort of acceptance that's what needs to happen. The problem is that was also basically the way that last season, if not explicitly, was almost implicitly sold to fans, and instead that they're having to go through the same thing again. It'll be fascinating to see what reception Steve Bruce gets on Sunday. It'll be the first time he's been in front of a full St James's Park crowd since February 2020. Since then, the results have really, obviously last season was very, very difficult. The football, as you say, for large parts, but even when at the start of the season, when they were getting some positive results, the football for a large part was awful. I mean, that West Ham game, I remember actually the first game of last season, after watching West Ham, I remember thinking West Ham are really going to struggle this year. So that shows you what I know about football. But then that was basically Newcastle's best performance in the whole of probably the first 6 months of the season. After that, there was very little positive from them. They nicked a few results here and there, but they really struggled. And certainly by January, they'd already gone to Brentford in the League Cup in December and being turned over by a semi-reserve side. They then went to winless Sheffield United in January, put out a team to try not to lose and got completely dominated and lost. And then by March, they went to Brighton and got hammered 3-0, and it was an appalling performance. And at that stage, I remember writing for The Athletic that it felt like the end. It felt untenable. He didn't see how he was going to stay around. And I think the fact that fans weren't there possibly did contribute to the fact that he stayed around. I mean, Mike Ashley's ignored supporters before. The relationship with Alan Pardew at one stage had gone beyond the pale, but he still stuck around. But still then, Newcastle weren't in the situation they were in March. And so the last game of last season, there was 10,000 fans in for Sheffield United. In the lap of appreciation afterwards, an audible minority booed Steve Bruce. In some of the preseason games this year, there's been a few negative chants towards him, not from a majority of fans, but from a few at least. So I think if they start the season badly, then things could go toxic very, very quickly. So it'll be fascinating to see if they start the season well on Sunday, and if they start the season well in general, that might buy him some time. But if West Ham come and turn Newcastle over on Sunday, then I really do worry about what the atmosphere could be like, and then what effect that could have on everyone.
Chris, I've got a real, and I know loads of West Ham fans have. I know there was talk last season, you'll know, of course, there was talk of joint protests at the two games between the sets of fans who both felt so strongly about the people who owned their respective clubs. And there is a real affinity among West Ham fans towards Newcastle supporters. As far as that Steve Bruce situation goes, though, this is a personal opinion of mine, it seems like, and I've hated it before when Allardyce was in charge at West Ham and people would say, oh, stop moaning, you're in the top 12 or whatever. I hated that, because for the people that go every week, they pay their money to go and be entertained. It's not a duty to go. But when I look at it from an outsider, it seems very much that, what else is anyone else going to do there? And do you feel that's wrong of me to say that? No, actually, yes, it's a bad situation, but there is still room for better football to be played and room for improvement? Or do you think, you know what, if it's not Steve Bruce, then it's going to be someone else? And when you've got such limited resources, you're backed into a corner and have to play a certain style of football?
I think there's a value to both views. I mean, I agree that Steve Bruce is to an extent on a hiding to nothing, and I feel from it because at Mike Ashley's Newcastle that there is a glass ceiling which every manager comes up against, and also the problem that there is because there's so little communication from those above. Managing director Lee Charnley has not spoken publicly throughout the whole of the pandemic, even though he, at the start of 2019-20, he came out in program notes and said that you're going to hear from a lot more regularly. Basically, Steve Bruce has been left to wallow in that sense, and he hasn't helped himself with a lot of the comments that he's made. But he's the only person who communicates for the club. Well, no, you can't blame him. You can't blame him in one sense, but equally, if he's the only voice that you ever hear, then eventually you're going to tie yourself in knots. And I mean, and the other counterpoint I would say to those who look at it and say, well, what else do you expect? My argument for Newcastle last season was that the players that I mentioned earlier that they had and that they have, it probably is a mid-table bottom half team, but they should never have been in as bad a situation as they were. If you have Callum Wilson, who I think just about any other team in the bottom half, if not the bottom 12, would want as a striker. If you have Alan Saint-Maximin in your squad, if you have Miguel Almiron, you should not be in the position that Newcastle were in, which was fourth bottom with 10 games to go. And that was part of the issue. And there were myriad reasons for that. They had COVID issues, had injury problems, but also before that, there was no discernible style. Nobody knew how they were trying to play. Players didn't seem to be improving under Steve Bruce. And so I think after his first 18 months, maybe even, I could argue, slightly longer, where he'd come in and inherited a very, very difficult situation and really steadied Newcastle to a certain extent, kept them up. You could put up with the fact that there wasn't any discernible style or whatever, because it's like, right, well, he's come in and he stabilized it. But at no point did it look like they were progressing towards anything. It looked like at some point they were inevitably going to get dragged back into relegation battle. They finished last season well, and he needs to continue that momentum at the start of this year. And I think that if he does, then some fans will give him the benefit of the doubt and will give him a bit of time. But I think he needs to start this season positively to really try and get at least some of them back on side. Some of them won't. I don't think some of them didn't. A minority of fans didn't want him to begin with. And I think that there is probably an increasing minority who will never accept him either, but given what's happened over the last year or two. But I also think that there's a majority of fans who will just look at it as, right, well, see how you start this season and see what you can
fresh slate almost.
Yeah.
Looking ahead to this weekend, Chris, obviously we're all excited that finally season starts again, the fans are back, but I can't help but look back at the beginning of last season when we faced each other and completely turned us over at London Stadium. This time to St James's Park. We historically start seasons very, very poorly, and then either continue really, really poorly or start playing quite well, like last season. But in terms of what we can expect from Newcastle, sorry, that was my Alexa. What can we expect from Newcastle? I saw Steve Bruce saying that he's adamant that he's got 6 or 7 strikers in his squad. Newcastle fans beg to differ. Can we expect to see all of them play, given that the majority of them aren't actually strikers?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, what you will see from Newcastle is what they played towards the end of last season, how they played throughout pre-season, and all of their transfer activity. They haven't actually signed anyone yet. All of their intended transfer activity is aimed towards is playing a 5-3-2, 3-5-2, however you want to look at it. So essentially, they are now playing with, for a long while, Steve Bruce said he wanted to play with 4 at the back. He was adamant he wanted to play with 4 at the back. but he kept reverting to 5-man defence because Newcastle players were more comfortable, he said, playing in that way, and they were able to defend. Subsequently, he switched, and now it is more of a 3 certainly at home, rather than a 5. And so John Joe Shelvey, if he is fit, he's had a few issues in pre-season, but he has played. He played 45 minutes against Norwich last weekend. He played 45 minutes against Burnley. He plays as like a deep-lying number 6 and is expected to spray passes going forward. If Joe Willock arrives in time, he will be one of the 2 number 8s, as they say, probably him and Miguel Almiron, or maybe Ryan Fraser, who's been converted into this sort of attacking central midfielder, with then Alan Saint-Maximin and Callum Wilson up front. So really what Newcastle are looking to do, they have an idea that over time they're going to start to build from the back more and try to progress through the thirds. But really Newcastle's main offensive threats are when they counter-attack at pace, and they have pace and transition. They have the likes of Alan Saint-Maximin bombing forward, Callum Wilson arriving at the box, Joe Willock. And so that's very much what you'll see from Newcastle. And I think you'll see an attempt to be a bit more expansive than they were certainly in the away at West Ham last year. Newcastle played 4-4-2, which was something they didn't play very often later on the season. Andy Carroll even started that game, and we barely saw him again after that. But when West Ham visited Newcastle later in the season, they sort of played to an extent how they're going to try and play on Sunday. And it'll be interesting to see how they do function, because like so many teams, Newcastle haven't had a lot of their players around due to international duty or various different reasons. So it'll be interesting to see how sharp Newcastle actually are as a side.
All right, Chris, I've got one more, but just a real brief one before we move on to the last question. Andy Carroll, is he doing anything else, or is he just, that's him, he's packed up now? Have you heard anything? You got your ear to the ground on that one at all?
Well, I heard that basically he still wants to continue playing, possibly abroad, is what I heard. I'd heard that he'd have hot offers, I think, from some far-flung places. I'd heard China, potentially, maybe even the MLS. I think he's turned down a couple of those and is sort of waiting to see. I don't think it's entirely beyond the realms of possibility that he might end up as a very late signing for Newcastle. I don't expect him to return to Newcastle, but I don't think it's 100% he's no longer a Newcastle player. I think if it comes to the end of the window, then Newcastle still think they need a forward, and Andy Carroll can come to some sort of play agreement. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility, but I think it's likely he's probably going to end up at a championship club or something like that. He still wants to continue playing. I think he wants to do a bit of coaching on the side as well. But it's been a strange couple of years from back at Newcastle. He came in and it was a bit. It was an emotional return from, and in many ways there was a lot of nostalgia attached from Newcastle fans. But we just did not see any of the Andy Carroll that we're reminded of from a decade previously. Obviously, injuries have taken their toll on him.
Did he score?
He scored once. He scored once against Leicester City on. Actually, it was just after I'd written a piece on The Athletic, just at the turn. I think I wrote on Boxing Day, because on Boxing Day it became exactly a decade since he'd scored for Newcastle. So I wrote that, and then the following week he went and scored against Leicester. but that was the only time he scored. He got quite a few assists, certainly 2 seasons ago, not last season. But he had an impact in the dressing room. But yeah, in terms of playing wise, he was really. It was almost when he came on in games, it was almost the idea of Andy Carroll that scared opposition defenses rather than what Andy Carroll could actually do.
Yeah. Well, Chris, look, it's been absolutely brilliant having you for the first time on the We Are West Ham podcast. Just quickly then, for last one, before we let you go, looking ahead to the season, for those of us who feel genuine empathy with the Newcastle fans, because they've got a club who are similar to many West Ham fans are not going in the direction they'd like it to, or apparently at the moment not going in any direction at all. What is there to what's some positive things that they can hold on to or look towards this season, whatever side that's from, takeover, playing style, or just a good new hamburger stand near the ground? Just give me something to be positive about for the Newcastle fans.
I'd go for 2 very quick ones. First of all, I mean, I know this is for all clubs, but particularly for Newcastle, where St James's Park is situated in the city. I think having fans back and having that buzz around the city again is going to be huge for everyone, and just being able to have that. So it felt, and I know it did everywhere for everyone, but it really felt like such a strange environment when Newcastle, it felt like something was missing. So to have fans back and to have that match the atmosphere will be huge. And I think the second one is the attacking players I mentioned before. Callum Wilson's never played in front of Newcastle United fans before. So to have Callum Wilson and Alan Saint-Maximin and potentially Joe Willock all in the same team. Willock's only played one game in front of 10,000 fans in May. Those attacking players, there is some exciting attacking players that I understand why some people look at it and think, well, what are you complaining about as Newcastle fans? Because there are some really good players there. It's just getting them out on the pitch at the same time. It's getting them in a system to play well. But I think the raw materials are there for Newcastle to actually be a decent team to watch.
Lovely stuff. Chris, it's Newcastle versus West Ham Sunday afternoon, 2:00 at St James's Park. Quick score prediction?
2-2.
2-2. I don't know. James, would you take a 2-2? You love a Desmond, don't you?
I do love a Desmond. Yeah, I think I would take a 2-2 as long as we avoid defeat. I think we've lost our last 7 openers over the last 7 years. So just going into a season without a defeat would be nice.
Exactly, mate. Exactly. Well, Chris Waugh from The Athletic there. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris, for the first opposition view of the season and for your first time on the We Are West Ham podcast.